Hey, welcome back. This is episode 31, and I'm glad that y'all are here with me on this day. This has been a interesting last couple weeks, not just globally, but also for myself personally. It just seems like every time I record, it's always an interesting time. Yeah, I mean, not to go too deep into my personal life, but just a lot of things happened all at once that I legitimately thought that I was gonna have to put this show to an end because it was really bad. But I think now I'm in a good position. I'm actually quite proud of myself because normally when that kind of stuff happens, because it included car stuff and my computer. I'm recording off of a different computer now because man, it's just so many different things added up, and I was able to handle it. I didn't have a breakdown because normally I would have just shut down or something. So. But I'm here now, I'm recording, and I especially wanted to get this out considering recent events on the global stage, particularly in the Middle East with Palestine and Israel. But before I dive into that, I wanted to talk about at least the platforms that I use, such as Twitter, because I feel like monthly uploads are just better for me and for the podcast. That way I can just let things accumulate and then I can just get it out when I'm ready with it. But yeah, with Twitter, I'm trying to be more active on that platform. So yeah, just mainly shit posting. I'm not really doing anything serious. But yeah, if you just wanted to see how my mind works, you can follow me there. But also, I mean, before I talk about the main stuff on the show, because we divided into different segments, and I'm going to start with the international this time. So we have the international, the domestic, within the United States, and the natural. But before I talk about the main meat of the show, I kind of wanted to touch up on Twitter since I was already mentioning it. But just a recent discourse. Oh, geez. If y'all hadn't been paying attention, I don't exactly know how it started or who brought the topic up. But it just eventually just got out of control. And this is one of those situations where I'm just like, what are they doing over there? I was I really wanted to stay out of it, but it was just getting too much. So basically the whole gist was just talking about because I'm not really invested in that world, but the level of kinkiness or the level of sex appeal within a pride event, within Pride Parade. And then again, I'm a cisgendered guy, heterosexual dude. That's just not a world that I've ever been exposed to. I mean, again, I've just never been to a pride event. Not that I'm avoiding it. It's just it would be kind of different if I went on my own. At the very least, I need a friend with me. But I mean, that's beside the point. My point there is mainly just I don't usually go to those events because it's mainly sexual in nature. And if I went there on my own, at the very least I'm bi-curious or something. So that's why I usually just don't go. Not that I think it's wrong. It's just not for me. And even then, sexual events, I guess you could say, a spring break pool party, that's not something that I'm into either. So there's nothing to do with the orientation of the event. It's just mainly people twerking and dancing on each other and champagne, those springers or whatever you want to call it. I just don't want to deal with that. But that's just me. So it has nothing to do with the orientation of the party involved. But then we also talked about, or not me, but just the discourse was also about just how family friendly and how kids should be exposed to sex and homosexuality. And yeah, man, I'm sorry. There was just some takes that just blew me away because it just eventually turned into, well, this is a good thing because now the kids, I can't even bring up a specific tweet that I just read, but yeah, man, it's just again, this is just one of those moments where I'm just this is why people think the left is losing its mind, because now you got people who are making some pretty ridiculous statements, but because it's, I guess, protected, nobody can really criticize it, even though it's batshit insane. Again, I don't even know where I'm going with this. I'm just saying that that was just crazy to see with Twitter and the level of vitriol, because if you weren't 100%, if you just said, hey, maybe you shouldn't be twerking in front of 2-year-olds, it's not good. Suddenly you're a Nazi, homophobe. Oh, you're trying to stifle their sexuality expression. Like, no, that's just you can't do that. You can't put wet ass pussy on YouTube Kids. That's not good. like Cardi B even says she wouldn't show that to her kids. You know, like I have a question now. This is more like a hypothetical, and I didn't want to present this on Twitter because it's too public. But I just had a question concerning the depiction of kids sexually. Gross. But like, okay, so we had Cuties that came out on Netflix, right? And we all collectively agreed that was gross, grooming, predatory, child pornography. That, like, pretty much everybody on all spectrums agreed that this was terrible. And the ones who were saying, well, I don't know, I just want to be devil's advocate, yeah, they were pretty sus and canceled, right? So now with this discourse about kinkiness at Pride, which, listen, like, kids can absolutely go to a Pride event, okay? Like, they can absolutely do that. You know, maybe they'll discover something about themselves. But, you know, if you've got guys in gimp suits and, you know, dildos and, like, I'm sorry, like, that's just, you can't do that. Anyway, but so we agreed that Cuties was bad. You know, these little girls dancing, twerking, revealing themselves, not good, right? But if that were gay boys dancing, so if we had a gay boy Cuties, you know, movie that came out, would people be saying that? Like, would people have that same reaction of disgust and just, oh my God, like I'm genuinely curious now, because I feel like that you would see a larger proportion of that crowd saying, oh, this is empowering, this is inspiring, this is like, and these are little boys, like, okay, I don't even want to describe it because it's just it's disgusting either way, but it's just, wow, I'm just aghast. And this is why people think the left is losing its mind. And I bet you there's people on all sorts of alt-right, you know, Parler and shit, taking screenshots and saying, look at these crazy motherfuckers, they're trying to do this to our kids. And so, yeah, man, you know, this is why I know a lot of times when I talk about sexuality, I sound like a Puritan, but you got a lot of people who lead with lust in this life, and they just think, you know, just being vulgar and just being out there, that's, you know, inherently good. I mean, you know, I'm okay with sexuality in the sense of like creativity, artistic, or in terms of self-expression. But if it's just straight up like public displays of vulgarity, you know, like it's not even like you're at the beach, like you're in the middle of downtown. Like, I'm sorry, you know, y'all can do what you want, but, you know, in a club, that's fine. But then when you're out in the street, it's a different environment. Like, again, I don't want to stay too long on this. That's just my 2 cents, and cancel me if you want. I don't really care about, I just don't care. Yeah, it's just wrong. It's bad. So, not the pride, not, you know, the queerness. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, yeah. So, that's what I want to say on that. That's all I'm going to say on it. But now we're going to talk about the main issues on this show. And we had recently a bit of a flare-up, if you could call it, in the Middle East. The good old, you know, love-hate relationship between Palestine and Israel. Or just, it's mainly hate, really. I shouldn't say love, but it really flared up. And for a hot second there, like, it seemed really bad. Like, it seemed like, I mean, it was an international crisis, but I was just thinking to myself, like, oh, here we go, Armageddon. So, yeah. But what happened? Well, I can't exactly give you just a whole rundown. So this is just my summary of the events. So, of course, as we know with Israel, it's a Jewish state. You know, it portrays itself as a democracy, but it's really a Jewish state. And it's sliding further and further into this right-wing Zionist attitude of Jews living in this homeland and effectively just moving out the undesirables, the Arabs and the Palestinians, and, well, they're the same really, but the Muslims, right? Even Arab Christians, Palestinian Christians are discriminated against. So, you know, in a lot of ways, people think this is a religious issue, but now it's turning into an ethnic issue, a racial issue. So, you know, so that's like the main issue of, Zionist settlers moving into annexed territories, occupied territories in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, moving out the indigenous population, the Arab population that lives there, and just taking it. And then, some of y'all probably saw the video of the guy from Brooklyn. He's just standing in the middle of the backyard. He's like, "Listen, if I don't take it, someone will." It's like, dude, like, the irony is so lost on these guys, because if a Native American walked into their yard and just said, like, "Listen, this is mine. My ancestors lived here, and this is, the UN is even saying this is mine," like, they would be shot, like, immediately. So it's crazy that these Palestinians are just trying to, like, defend their homes, and then the second they retaliate, if somebody invades their space and they retaliate and push that person out, the police will come in and evict them. So it's yeah, man. I'm sorry, because, like, I have quite a few. I only have one Israeli friend, and this is like a childhood friend. So, I mean, with everything that's been happening, I reached out to her and I said, "Look, like, I have very strong opinions about the situation, but this is not an anti-Semitic view or anything. This is purely just something that I have to talk about in principle, because this is an injustice." And, we went back and forth, nothing too heated. But, eventually I just, asked her, because, she moved to New York. And I just asked her, and I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing in New York?" And turns out she's working for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. So, oh boy. So yeah, my childhood friend could be an agent of the Mossad. That's fun. Oh, but I mean, I shouldn't even call her that. But I'm just saying, like, yeah. Who knows? I thought she was a lawyer. Like, I was just like, oh shit, like, but yeah, it's fascinating to see just the way that they rationalize their actions, because even though she's not, like, inherently prejudiced against Arabs, she still feels the need to defend her country and to defend the response. It's crazy. I'm sorry. Yeah, but okay. So they have this neighborhood in East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah. That's where that Brooklyn guy was, in the backyard, and yeah, and there's a current court case. I believe that the people who are the Jews who are taking the Palestinian families to court, they have a claim where their families owned that area way back in the 19th century. So I mean, like, they have a claim in quotation, but the families are already living there, and it's not like these people are struggling. The Jews that are trying to get the Palestinians evicted, like, they're not struggling at all. So this is purely just, let's get them out and we'll take back what's ours. I mean, that's the whole mentality of Israel. It's just, let's get them out and then we'll take back what's ours. So it's going to a court, an Israeli court. I believe that they had to suspend it, which just further flared up tensions. And then, at the end, because it was in the middle of Ramadan as this was happening. So as Ramadan was winding down, with Eid Mubarak and such, they had Arabs and Palestinians praying in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the police raided the mosque and pushed them out. There was a image floating around of a fire and the Israelis dancing around, celebrating. Really, it was just a tree, so not the actual mosque that was on fire. But if you look at some images, like, inside the mosque, like, they were throwing, like, stun grenades, tear gas. So, like, they were desecrating that holy site. That's what it is. It's a holy site. So understandably, the Arabs in the country, the Arabs in the region, and the Arabs in Gaza, the Palestinians, they were understandably pissed off, and they retaliated, and they started firing rockets, and that's where we saw everything spiral. So that was pretty much a layman's, like, interpretation of events. I just mainly just wanted to speak about this conflict, and just how we're seeing a cycle, repeat itself, and each time it's getting further and further radical. It's becoming more hateful because you have a lot of Israelis who genuinely hate Arabs, that think they're, some subhuman group. I mean, like, this is literally the same mentality as the Nazis. The same mentality, but they're Zionists. So since they're Zionists and they want to have their Jewish Lebensraum, it's okay, right? Anyway, yeah. So just wanted to talk at least about this conflict. But, right now we're in a bit of a ceasefire. And still, people are getting arrested. Gaza is still under siege, so they have electricity issues, and they barely have clean water to begin with. So it's only worse now. Those warplanes, they targeted infrastructure, they targeted buildings. I mean, they killed roughly 200 Palestinians, mostly women and children. They attacked the AP building, saying that Hamas was working out of there, which, it was a war crime. It's just like all these things are adding up, and it's so public and documented that you can't ignore it. And yet you still have the United States blocking a UN resolution calling for a ceasefire. You still have Joe Biden saying, "Oh, well, I think Israel should defend itself." Yeah, nobody's really speaking up for Palestine. Luckily, though, this time around, a lot of public figures were. Bella Hadid, that's a pretty big star to be talking about this issue. And also, I was pretty surprised by people. Even my sister was talking about this stuff. So people who would normally just ignore the issue, they were speaking out about it. I think it had a large part to do with just the BLM protests, and people are seeing directly the same dynamic between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So of course they had to speak out about it. So I'm glad about that more people are being brave. Talk out about Israel for a long time was a big no-no. Even when I was talking about Israel during their 2014 war, I was getting a lot of crap. And I said some pretty edgy stuff, but when I talked about Israel, whoa, a lot of people came out against it. So I'm glad now people are more receptive and open. But yeah, so I want to read this from WBUR.org, and they're just talking about this conflict. So reading: the fighting in Israel and Gaza entered its second week. Israeli warplanes bombarded Gaza on Monday morning as Hamas continues lobbing rockets on southern cities in Israel. Roughly 200 Palestinians have died, and officials say nearly half of them are women and children. Israel has reported at least 12 dead. Of course, many more people have suffered in the long history of this conflict. Since Hamas took control of the Gaza Strip in 2007, Israel and Egypt have maintained a blockade on the area. Khalid El-Gindi, director of Israeli-Palestinian Affairs at the Middle East Institute, answers some fundamental questions that get to the root of what's happening in Gaza. So let me see if I can find a good one. Okay, so there's one question talking to this guy, El-Gindi, about how Palestinians feel about Hamas within Gaza Strip. And mind you that Hamas is effectively the government of Gaza. It is very interesting because they portrayed the Palestinians as though they're one thing, when really there's so many different groups like Fatah and the PLO, or I think PLO and Fatah are the same thing, and also with Hamas, and then there's the Palestinian Authority. So when somebody is saying, oh, well, the Palestinians this and that, they really don't understand anything. So of course, they should shut up, but yeah. So anyway, right, so the question is, how do Palestinians living inside the Gaza Strip feel about Hamas and their governing tactics, considering the living conditions there? Quote, of course, Hamas has its political base. They're at least the second largest political force in all of Palestinian politics, second only to Fatah party of Mahmoud Abbas, which dominates the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and so they have a strong following historically. I think a lot of Palestinians have grown very disaffected from both leaderships because they have essentially failed. Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority have failed in their project to create a Palestinian state through negotiations and diplomacy, and the Hamas Authority in Gaza certainly has failed to liberate Palestine or to bring back Palestinian independence or even a lifting of the grinding blockade in Gaza. So there's a broad sense of alienation, I think, from both of these leaderships on the part of the Palestinians. And I think, to add on top of that, I think a lot of Palestinians are frustrated with, we know that when Hamas launches rockets into Israel, that Israel's response will be far more devastating than anything Hamas hopes to achieve, damage-wise on the Israeli side. And so I think there is also a frustration there. But again, I think the Palestinians don't really have a say here. They are on the receiving end of Israeli bombs and artillery. And in times like this, people tend to sort of rally around the flag. They will even rally around the leadership that they dislike because it's their only hope. And the reality is that while the kind of official talking points in Israel is that Hamas is entirely responsible for any death and destruction, not just on the Israeli side that they inflict, but whatever Israeli inflicts also on the Palestinian side. Hamas is purely responsible. That argument is extremely disingenuous because it's Israel's choice to use overwhelming disproportionate force. And there is no Palestinian who will blame. They may blame Hamas, I think, for their poor decision making. But the carnage that we see in Gaza, the overwhelming majorities put the blame squarely on Israel. That's pretty much a good summary of how Palestinians in Gaza feel. They could absolutely hate Hamas and not stand for anything, but because they're the only group that's actually taking the fight to Israel, and these are people just hunkering down in their apartment blocks. These construction codes, just from the way these buildings collapse, you can tell that this construction code is not up to par. They just had to build something. So very flimsy buildings. There's basically might as well be paper cards, like a card tower, a house of cards. That's what I meant to say. So they feel like they had no choice. If you're born there, you're fucked from the start. That's one of the only areas in the world where if you're born there, you're fucked. Yeah. So let me read further. Okay, there's another one. So, how does Hamas get weapons despite the closed borders and blockade? Quote, typically Hamas has had a very elaborate secret network of tunnels that go under the Gaza-Egypt border, and in some cases tunnels that burrow into Israel. To be able to launch surprise attacks whenever they can. Part of the problem is that in the neighboring Sinai Peninsula, which is Egyptian territory, you have a bit of a security vacuum. There is a kind of low-level insurgency happening there, and the Egyptian state is not necessarily in control of all parts of the Sinai Peninsula. And so there's a very robust arms trade and collaboration between insurgent groups and militant groups in the Sinai adjacent to the Gaza Strip. And so that's one key avenue for Hamas to get weapons, which can be procured from Iran or from elsewhere. As long as you keep Gaza under this kind of intense pressure, whether it's Hamas or someone else, they will always find a way to obtain weapons and to pose some sort of threat to Israel. So the idea that Israel can solve all these problems through overwhelming military force just hasn't panned out. These are political problems. The blockade is a political issue. Hamas is a political issue. The occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, that is a political issue. And you simply cannot just deal with everything in security and in military terms, which is Israel's preference in order to avoid having to make any political concessions. I think that's very much on the point. So this is very much all political, but they just want to swerve around this. And it's messed up because Israel, they're so confusing because they don't want two states. Because if you have a two-state, then you're going to have to treat Palestine as an equal partner, right? And then they're obviously not going to do that. And Palestine would be able to have their own arms and have their own means of security and defense against Israel. They would have to lift the blockade and they would have to do all that. Because if not, then they would be admitting that they're in a state of war. They also don't want to integrate the Palestinians from Gaza into Israel. They don't want that either. And then they don't want to admit that this is an open-air prison. So what is this? This is just it's a prison, but Israel just has that there so that way they can have an other that they're always armed against. Because, I mean, they've already made their peace with Syria and Jordan and Egypt. Well, I mean, I say peace in quotes, but, like, it's far easier to have a low-level insurgency and, just occasional, burst of violence from this little area that you can just bomb and put the people in line than, a state like Syria, which has a military, has the backing of international powers. Like, that's a very different animal. Yeah, man. And I just love how Israelis, they think that they're so tough and they're so badass. Because, I mean, they have a lot of good stuff, don't get me wrong. And they are very well trained. But they're up against, like just people just trying to survive. Like, these people have no other option. Like, what? Yeah, man. Because it's crazy. Like, here's a thought. And this is a point that if a Zionist ever brings this up to me, like, I'm going to make this point to them, and they're not, the irony is not even going to like register for them. But the whole reason that the Jews were expelled, well, at least the last major time that they were expelled, was through their revolt against the Romans. So now think on that. So the Jews way back when took up arms against an oppressive regime because they needed their independence, right? They had to fight back. I mean, they're going to be wiped out regardless. Okay, but these Palestinians can't do that. Why? They were born here, and then a power came up, took them out of their homes, threw them out, and they've just been at war essentially for the last 70 years, since 1948. But they're the bad guys, right? Again, like, if it's if it's Jews taking up arms and defending themselves, oh great, awesome. But if it's Arabs, Muslims doing the exact same thing, trying to just have equal say, just to live, because I mean, this whole idea of Jews living in this area had already been happening under Ottoman rule. So like, this is purely the Zionists coming in saying, no, this has to be Jewish. And you're not equal to us. Like, so yeah, I mean, they would never see the irony in that. So yeah, there's just so much to say. I mean, I was watching the agenda-free TV streams about the whole thing, and just seeing the different images and footage from the strikes, the rocket strikes, and also from that system, Iron Dome system. That was pretty good, just to see technologically wise. I mean, I'm not one of these guys that's going to celebrate if an Israeli citizen gets killed, because, I mean, I don't want that, obviously. But the Palestinians have to retaliate some way. This is the only way that they can. Yeah, I mean, Israel could have easily just, like... Well, first of all, they could have just not attacked that mosque to begin with. But, they could have easily just had the Iron Dome system take out the missiles, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not a military person. Like, even though I study it, I can't pretend as though I know the intricacies of this conflict. But, like, yeah, man, like, people were dying, kids were dying. Like, this feels very much like the abusive father who's just like, hey, look, like Omni-Man, just like, look what you made me do. You're fighting to destroy a Jewish state. Don't you understand? Think, Palestine. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, man. Oh, no. Why did I make that analogy? Oh, jeez. So, yeah. That was just something to keep an eye on, and I just want to talk about this first because that was pretty intense watching that, especially going on like Snapchat and just seeing what people are going through. And it's just a night and day difference when because Tel Aviv and the Gaza Strip are not that far. They're very close to each other. So yeah, just seeing the difference in the quality of life, where you go to Tel Aviv and like people are just coming out of the, people are dancing in the street after they've just been running all over, trying to get to a bomb shelter, and then you go to Gaza and they're still getting bombed, and like there's zero power, so you just see darkness, and then poof, 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 and it's like, it's heavy bombing, and then you hear children crying, and it's just like, wow, Jesus Christ. Wow, man. But yeah, And not just that, okay? So we have the Gaza, Palestine, Israel conflict, right? But then you also have the Arab Israelis living in Israel. So they're Israeli citizens that are Arabs. We saw race riots, essentially. People attacking each other in the streets, Arabs attacking Jews, Jews attacking Arabs. I mean, it was shameful. I mean, it was Kristallnacht. Really, it was the Israelis attacking the Arabs more. But yeah, man, like they pulled a guy out of his car, and then they started beating him with the Israeli flag, or with their flagpoles with the Israeli flag. And I'm just sitting here like, are you like, well, what difference is this? And then Nazi Germany, like, there's no difference, and the irony is lost on them. They just don't see it. They don't want to see it. They don't want to admit it. It's crazy, man. And then there was another image of like these two girls just like dancing, yeah, Israel, and they're like in front of this cafe that just got Molotov. It's just like, are you? I just can't believe what, like, we really, like, the whole world just saw what Israel is about. Like, we just saw it, but they want to sweep it under the rug. The mainstream media sources, they don't want to talk about it, because if you saw any kind of like media source, like if somebody was talking about Israel and the fucked up stuff that they were doing, they just go, but Hamas. Do you agree that Hamas is a terrorist organization? Like, it's just like, well, we're talking about Israel and apartheid in Israel, not Hamas right now. Like, yeah, just deflecting. And really, you come to understand that in the United States as well, you got a lot of people that, a lot of Trump supporters that love Israel, but it has nothing to do with Judaism, because they're not big fans of Jews. They're not, okay? This has everything to do with their death cult prophecy of Armageddon, the battle of Armageddon, which Jesus will descend from, and they'll bring the end of the world, or whatever, just some weird stuff. But that's basically what it is. It's just a death cult prophecy that needs to be fulfilled. And like, you've got Christians in power, because a lot of these Republicans believe this. They are willing to plunge the world into a nuclear holocaust if that means that they can achieve their prophecy. And then Jesus comes down, and he leaves their ass behind, because like, hey, you're a fucking dick. So yeah. Oh man. So yeah. I mean, there's just so much to unpack here. But this isn't over. Like, this isn't over. Like, okay, there's a ceasefire, but they still are arresting Palestinians. There's still protests going on. Luckily, there were, pro-peace protests between Israelis and Arabs in Israel, so that was promising to see. And also some other promising news about Israel's domestic politics. So yeah. So essentially, before all this violence broke out, there was a coalition formed, an anti-Likud, anti-Netanyahu coalition formed between the political parties. And so recently they're coming into a deal, an agreement. Oh man. Damn it, they always do this. Like, they show the full article, and then when I click back, it's like, oh, we'll get the premium. Okay. So, basically what happened was they had a coalition, and then they, had this breakout of violence, and it seemed like the coalition was done for. But now it appears as though they could make a comeback, and they could actually, kick Netanyahu out of power. So that's promising. Because this certainly felt like, because they were going in hard, and Netanyahu was certainly trying to be a strong man, just talking with absolute, I don't know how to describe it, but, just this bellicose language. It's so strange, like, seeing modern day politicians talking about, talking like Roman generals, like, we will crush them to dust. Like it was basically the language that they had. So yeah, man. But yeah, that sucks about that article because I was going to talk more about that. But yeah, so it seems like they can, get him out of power. And I mean, it's not going to change anything because there's still like a very deeply rooted sentiment of ethno-nationalism, Zionism, of Jewish supremacy. Because I mean, they believe it. They believe that they're God's chosen people. So like, yeah, they're gonna have some weird ethnic, racial identity about them. Because they discriminate against Ethiopian Jews. They're black, but they're Jewish, and they're discriminated against heavily. And it's crazy too, because Jews 2,000 years ago, if you brought a Jew 2,000 years ago to today, one of those IDF soldiers would probably just shoot him like every other Palestinian, even though they're the same religion. Like they're the same people, right? That's the ancestor that you claim from, right? And you're gonna shoot him down, like, so that's what it's just lost on them. Yeah, man. It's sad. And again, I have this friend, and she is a good friend. I did not know about her profession until recently, but I just I don't know. I just I want to believe people are good, and I want to believe. I mean, I understand that she feels the need to defend her country and defend her people. I get it. All right, you want to do your duty, but you're defending a criminal government, a settler colony. Yeah, but I mean, she doesn't listen to this podcast, so it's just something I'm going to say here. So yes, we had that happening, and then we also had a wave of anti-Semitic views, anti-Semitic attacks. I mean, there were some pretty bad images and footage of Jews getting attacked, specifically in New York. So that's not good either, because I mean, we don't want to be anti-Semitic here. I have a deep respect for Jewish history, actually. So like, because I mean, it's super ancient. Like, damn, and you guys kept this together for so long. Like, I got some respect for that. I don't agree with the Moel Chai, but yeah, that's that's all I got to say there. So, but I wanted to talk about just, these attacks, these anti-Jewish attacks that have been occurring. So I'm reading this from the BBC. As the world watched fighting rage in Israel and Gaza, U.S. Jews endured an increase in anti-Semitic attacks on a scale not seen during previous Middle East conflicts. Experts say it is too early to tell if the high-profile assaults, including a daylight brawl in New York's Times Square, point to a trend or a part of a already high level of such incidents seen across the country in recent years. Violence and harassment targeting American Jews broke out coast to coast amid the 11 days of fighting between Israelis and Palestinians that ended in a ceasefire on May 20th. Incidents included outdoor diners in Los Angeles who were physically attacked by a group carrying Palestinian flags, violence against Orthodox Jews in New York City, home to the largest population of Jews outside of Israel, and Nazi imagery posted on the synagogue in Alaska this week. Pro-Palestinian protests and anti-Jewish vandalism at synagogues, which are quickly stepping up security due to the attacks, have also been documented in Illinois and Florida. President Joe Biden wrote on Twitter Monday, the attacks, or quote, the attacks on the Jewish communities are despicable and they must stop, end quote. According to the New York City Police, there have been 80 anti-Semitic hate crime reports made this year compared to 62 in the same period last year. They have stepped up patrols in Jewish communities, especially in Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, where the visibility of traditional Jewish clothing increases the likelihood of attacks. The Anti-Defamation League, which tracks incidents of anti-Jewish violence and bias, says they saw a 75% increase in anti-Semitism reports to the agency's 25 regional offices after Israeli-Palestinian fighting began. The figure jumped from 127 incidents in the 2 weeks prior to the fighting to 222 in the 2 weeks after violence broke out. So, yeah, pretty significant spike in anti-Semitism. And again, that's not good either. So it's like, you don't want to because they're conflating it and they're making this an ethnic issue and a religious issue, and like they're just completely missing it. So you got the Arabs who are rightfully upset and pissed off, but then they take it a step further and they attack all Jews, which is not good. And then you got the Jews who have been the target of attacks, pogroms, Holocaust, and genocides. So yes, they're a bit, jumpy. No offense. They're just, they're naturally jumpy, and in response to that, because they do have a lot of fear about being annihilated, they retaliate with absolute force, overwhelming force. I mean, that's kind of their mantra, really. We'll strike first and ask questions later. And sometimes it pays off, other times it's pretty irresponsible. So, yeah. Man. And I do have Jewish extended family members, so, I've never really had these kind of conversations with them, but just knowing the opinions of my, super Christian family members, it's probably not going to go well. So, yeah, man, it's crazy, man. I constantly think about, because, not that anything would happen, but I'm just like, if I somehow got with an Arab Muslim woman and had a family, started a family with her, because I don't care what religion or wherever you're from, so long as you're okay with me being an atheist. That's really my whole thing. If I got with an Arab Muslim woman, I'm genuinely concerned how my family is going to react to that, because they're going to want to enforce the Christian Catholic views, which I don't really care for, and it could get bad. It could get really bad, and I don't even know why I brought this up, but I'm just saying, like, I can imagine right now in a lot of domestic houses, home situations, like this kind of clash is like breaking apart families, because yeah, man, it's like an existential thing, and people have to go all in. Yeah, man, it's rough. This is a very touchy subject. But again, it's something you can speculate on, but you just don't really know until it happens. So there's that. I'm gonna move on, because that was quite a bit that I spoke on. Well, it's still in line with this Israeli Palestinian conflict, but I did just want to talk about this report from Al Jazeera pointing to the Irish Parliament passing a motion condemning what they call annexation in the West Bank. So as I've pointed out, there are settlers in the West Bank, which is supposed to be Palestinian land. So they're effectively violating international law, but they're still moving in there, and then you have the IDF defending them. So it's de facto annexation. It's de facto Israeli land, because you have Israeli civilians moving in, you have the military moving in, and the people who are living there, who are living on their land, as the international community recognizes, are being pushed out, are being occupied, the whole 9 yards. And it's good that Ireland is coming out, because they're directly affected by the colonial actions of the UK. And look at Belfast, right, Northern Ireland. So it's good that they came out for Palestinians, because they're really like the only like major world power really to be calling this out. So yes, the Irish Parliament has passed a motion condemning the, quote, de facto annexation of Palestinian land by Israeli authorities. The motion, tabled by the Sinn Féin party, passed on Wednesday after receiving cross-party support. This makes it the first European Union country to use the phrase de facto annexation in relation to Israel's actions in the occupied Palestinian territories. After the vote, Sinn Féin's leader, Mary Lou MacDonald, said on Twitter that the motion, quote, must mark a new, assertive, consistent confrontation of Israeli crimes against Palestine, end quote. Jelaine Waba Abdal-Majid, the Palestinian ambassador to Ireland, said the motion was great support for Palestinians as she praised Ireland. Quote, this motion is giving great support to the issue of the de facto annexation that is happening in Palestine, she told the Times newspaper. Quote, it's happening. Ireland is the first EU country to take such a position, end quote. John Brady, Sinn Féin's spokesperson for foreign affairs, hailed the motion as, quote, historic, and said he hoped other countries would follow Ireland's lead. Quote, this is the starting point, Brady said in a video posted on Twitter, adding that the focus should shift to holding Israel accountable for, quote, its illegal actions under international law, end quote. There now needs to be consequences on Israel to ensure that they cannot continue to act with perceived impunity for the human rights abuses of the Palestinian people, end quote. An amendment to the motion that sought to impose sanctions on Israel and expel the Israeli ambassador failed to pass. All right. So yeah, it's a pretty firm position that they're taking, and that's certainly more firm than what the United States is doing, because the United States really can just say, listen, you have to stop this or we're going to take away your aid. I mean, George H.W. Bush took a harder stance on this issue than Joe Biden did. That's really saying something. Yeah. So, good for Ireland for standing up with Palestine. Yeah, I mean, we're just going to have to see how this continues to unfold. This administration certainly isn't going to do anything to stop it, and it's going to continue with the same talking points. Oh, Israel should defend itself. Okay. Yeah, man. I mean, like, even Bernie Sanders, although he has been speaking out saying, you know, Israel's actions are wrong, even he has been having to back off and, you know, just, yeah, again, you know, I wanted to like Bernie Sanders, but now I think he's just kind of doing what he can, but even that is not enough, you know. Yeah, I think he's just tired. That's really probably it. So, yeah, man. So we're going to have to see this unfold and just keep following, because it's still ongoing. Like, the violence and the, you know, unrest, it's still there. And as I said, Gaza is still under siege. Well, it's always been under siege, but now it's elevated. You know, now they really don't have any means to rebuild. You know, their medical supplies, I mean, their medical system is about to collapse. What they're saying. Yeah, man, it's bad. Really bad. It's just a war crime in general. So that's the Israel conflict. So with that being said, I wanted to talk more on some other unrest and events that are occurring around the world, specifically with Colombia. So Colombia also had some unrest and some violence in the last couple of weeks. There have been, you know, deaths. I mean, the government and the police have been opening fire on the protesters. So this is slowly turning into a real uprising. And this is just recent, because Cali, the city of Cali, is turning out to be a hotbed for this unrest. And now the president, Duque, is sending the military in. Now, why did this whole unrest and protest start? Well, it had to deal with a tax plan, and just, you know, people out of work and, you know, just drowning essentially. So, yeah, very much neoliberal policies that are reminiscent of the uprisings that we saw in Chile not too long ago. So, or actually not even that, because I mean, the whole of Latin America or South America had a bit of a wave of protests that was completely ignored by the media, completely ignored. But it was a real, like, Latin American spring, even though, I mean, temporary. But I mean, we're still in the wake of it, and it could escalate further. So, reading from the BBC, Colombian President Ivan Duque says he is sending the military to restore order in the city of Cali after weeks of deadly anti-government protests. 4 people died in Cali on Friday night, the latest casualties in a month of protests which has claimed dozens of lives. The protests began in April over a proposed tax increase. The tax plan was withdrawn, but the protests grew to cover police violence, poverty, and Colombia's health crisis. 2 weeks of negotiations between the government and protesters have stalled. Cali, which has become the epicenter of the protest movement, is under curfew until Saturday morning. Speaking at a news conference in Cali, Mr. Duque said he was sending in the, quote, maximum deployment of military assistance to the police. Quote, this deployment will almost triple our capacity in less than 24 hours throughout the state, ensuring assistance as well at critical points where we have seen acts of vandalism, violence, and low-intensity urban terrorism, he said. One of those killed on Friday was an off-duty official in the Attorney General's office. The man opened fire on protesters before he was killed. Attorney General Francisco Barbosa said in a statement, Cali sits at a strategic point in the southwest of Colombia, connecting the urban center of the Pacific Ocean and the biggest port in the country, Buenaventura. During the pandemic, the numbers of people in poverty in Cali increased 3 times more than in the rest of the country. Much of its economy is informal, and it has a diverse population. It also has a high number of murders. That cocktail, in a very unequal and segregated city, was fuel for the protests. But then came the strong response of the authorities, who have treated many protesters as criminals and set up roadblocks which are seriously affecting the region's economic activity. The rage of both sides is huge, and with dialogue attempts having failed, it doesn't seem as though it'll calm down at any point soon. The demonstrations started on April 28th and were initially in opposition to a proposed tax reform which would have lowered the threshold at which salaries are taxed. The government argued that the reform was key to mitigating economic difficulties, but many middle-class Colombians feared they could slip into poverty as a result. After 4 days of protests across the country, President Duque said he would withdraw the draft legislation. However, human rights groups accused police of using tear gas and, in some cases, live ammunition to disperse the crowds. Dozens of people have since died. On Friday, Colombians marked 1 month since the protests began, with marches across the country. So yeah, this is really just a snowball effect of so many different things. So a lot of times when that initial burst of protests and unrest breaks out, it kind of goes away, as I said, with the tax reforms being canceled. But now it's turning into protests for police violence, and as he said, the health crisis. There's a lot of people unemployed, so people were already frustrated, and now they already got into the streets, and so now they're saying, hey, this is also bullshit, and this and that. Hey, the whole system is fucked. So that's kind of what I wanted to see out of the BLM protests. Don't get me wrong, I'm with BLM, but then they were stuck on the black justice. But I didn't see enough about, hey, how about universal health care, increased minimum wage, some real economic policies that even if somebody was a bit iffy about BLM, they would see that, hey, we also want this stuff. And then, okay, well, I'm with that. I don't know. Again, it's just, and I think we'll get there eventually. Don't get me wrong. I think we're going to get there eventually, but we just have to keep we have to maintain that momentum, right? Because again, it's not that BLM is wrong, their movement is wrong. I know I said some questionable things about them, but it's really just me being cautious, because this is very much one of those instances where you can get groomed into something that you didn't fully understand. So, yeah. But yeah, man, I just, I'm just sitting here thinking to myself because I do have friends that are in Colombia, and so they've been speaking on this, and a lot of the times when I'm talking to somebody in a different country, they're usually in an economic position that's far better than where I'm at. So I'm literally talking to the bourgeois of that specific country, and they're, they have some different views than the people on the streets. Because I'd be on the again, I say I'd be on the streets, but really I don't want to get shot at. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's happening in Colombia, and this article came out today, so we'll probably see some stuff in the weekend with Cali, but that was what was happening there. Speaking of other protests and uprisings, we have Myanmar, which has also been experiencing protests, and it's slowly turning more and more into a revolt. So this is coming from the AFP. A shadow government in Myanmar seeking to reverse the February 1st coup has joined forces with a rebel group to demolish junta rule, it said Saturday. Myanmar has been in turmoil since the military overthrew Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy government and launched a brutal crackdown on dissent. A group of ousted lawmakers later set up a shadow national unity government which has sought to bring anti-coup dissidents together with Myanmar's myriad ethnic rebel fighters to form a federal army to challenge the junta. So I mean, this is a civil war. It's basically turning into a civil war. On Saturday, the rebel Chin National Front signed an agreement to demolish the dictatorship and to implement a federal democratic system in Myanmar, the NUG said in a statement. They pledge mutual recognition and to partner equally, the statement added. Without giving further detail, a CNF spokesperson could not immediately be reached for comment. The group, which represents the mainly Christian Chin minority in western Myanmar, signed a ceasefire with the country's military, also known as Tatmada, in 2015. In recent years, its fighters have dwindled. Quote, the CNF has no real military strength, so this move is symbolic, Richard Horsey, senior advisor on Myanmar to the International Crisis Group, told AFP. Quote, but it is nevertheless significant as CNF has been quite prominent in the peace process due to its well-respected political leaders in exile, end quote. Several of Myanmar's rebel armed groups have condemned the military coup and the use of violence against unarmed civilians. Some are also providing shelter and even training dissidents who flee into their territories. But the more than 20 outfits have long distrusted the ethnic Bamar majority, including lawmakers affiliated with the Suu Kyi's government. On Friday, the NUG released a video it said showed the first batch of fighters from its People's Defense Force, formed to protect civilians completing their training. About 100 recruits were shown marching across flat ground surrounded by jungle. None appeared to be carrying weapons. Quote, let all Burmese people be freed from military slavery, end quote, the recruits were heard shouting. More than 800 people have been killed by the military, according to a local monitoring group, though the coup leader has given a much lower civilian toll. The junta has classified the NUG and the People's Defense Force as terrorists, meaning anyone speaking to them, including journalists, can be subjected to charges under counterterrorism laws. Coup leader Min Aung Hlaing has justified his February 1st power grab by claiming electoral fraud in November's election by Suu Kyi's NLD party. So, yeah. So there are rebel factions, rebel militias. I would imagine in Burma there are some pretty isolated spots. So it's pretty easy to just form a group and hide out. And then we also had, Rohingya Muslims and such. Myanmar is actually kind of in my blind spot, so I don't really know, or the whole really of Southeast Asia is kind of in my blind spot in terms of like geography and history, so that's something I do want to learn more about. But yeah, I would imagine there's just a whole bunch of different ethnic groups in this region that are just stuck together, and they have this military dictatorship ruling over them, so now they're banding together, and yeah, so we'll see how this pans out. And I would have no doubt that there are like CIA agents in Myanmar right now helping out these groups. So I can certainly see this turning into a proxy war between the West, NATO, and between China, because this military government in Myanmar does have close ties with China. So we'll see how this unfolds, but I just wanted to touch up on that. I mean, I've already seen some images and footage of the rebel militias fighting back, so we'll see. But they said like 800 people have been shot, and that's just the protesters being shot in the street. So I mean, yeah, this military government is really massacring their people. But yeah, so that's happening in Myanmar, and we'll have to touch up there. So with that, I also wanted to talk about India, as I mentioned before. So India had been suffering from a COVID crisis, their healthcare system being overrun, and just in general feelings of doom, really. Just seeing the different images of funeral pyres just mass cremations. I mean, can you imagine the smell? And then also there's some crazy images because some people, they'll go to the Ganges, their holy river, and they just throw the bodies in there. So there's just like rotten corpse. I mean, they were already doing that before. So I swear, religion is a hell of a drug. So yeah, people were already dumping bodies in there, and so now they're like doing it by the truckload essentially, and it's just unbelievable. And already people were like bathing in it before this pandemic broke out. So it's just, yeah, man, religion, man, I tell you. So yeah, so I'm reading this from CNBC. So I just want to at least touch up on just different updates because they've essentially been, getting donations from around the world, and in a lot of ways it's just a wake-up call because people thought that we're out of this pandemic, out of this coronavirus pandemic, and I got my shot yesterday, so I got that Pfizer. Anyway, I'm yeah, so I did the shot, so I'm officially augmented and chipped up. So yeah, what I was trying to say more so about India is just they're experiencing this wave, and it's just a wake-up call for us because we're starting to slack off now, and we're not out of this. We're not out. It's one of those situations where people are so ready to get back to normal and get back out there, but they jumped the gun too early, and then we're going to go right back to where we were before, but it's going to be worse because our system is already starting to crack. So yeah. Anyway, so CNBC, as India's devastating second wave of coronavirus outbreak overwhelmed the healthcare system, desperate users turned to social media to seek help from the public as hospital beds and oxygen supplies ran out. People in need of assistance, either for themselves or their relatives, posted requests on sites such as Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram. Others collected information on the availability of beds in hospitals, as well as contact details of vendors with oxygen cylinders and other resources in short supply. In many instances, the efforts help save lives. Quote, "We quite often hear only a very dystopian narrative for social media in which it is increasingly political polarization and causing a deep degree of social damage," Apar Gupta, executive director of Internet Freedom Foundation, a digital liberties organization in India, told CNBC. Quote, "But social media also has the potential of bringing people together," he said, and explained that's why it's important to fight for the right kind of incentives-based system design and algorithmic accountability around social media. Quote, "I think this COVID disaster that is continuing in India is showing the promise of social media to be used as a tool for organizing relief and also demanding greater amounts of political accountability at all levels, from our healthcare officials to decision makers who set budgets," Gupta said. Hashtag COVID SOS, Twitter hashtags like COVID SOS and hashtag COVID emergency became popular among users searching for hospital beds, ventilators, and oxygen cylinders. The retweet function helped amplify the requests. Strangers banded together to help one another weather the unprecedented crisis. Volunteers collated. Hold on, let me research that because they keep putting collated, and I don't even know what that is. Collate. Okay. So volunteers collated up-to-date information on Google spreadsheets that have been shared widely on social platforms. Some set up websites to track vaccine availability, while others created apps that generated links to Twitter search that help users find COVID-19 resources in their city. Many people also volunteered to make home-cooked meals for patients quarantining at home, while others offered assistance with tasks like grocery shopping. For its part, Twitter added a COVID-19 resource page to broaden the visibility of information. Social media influencers, celebrities, and politicians also got involved in the crowdsourcing effort, with some of them helping to arrange for beds and oxygen cylinders as India's daily case count spiked in April and early May. Though Twitter became the most visible social media platform in India's crowdsourcing efforts because of its ability to amplify requests and tag influencers and politicians, Gupta said other platforms were also used to a large extent. He said volunteers also came together in WhatsApp groups to focus on more granular communities such as housing societies and alumni groups. Gen Z, or those born between 1996 and the early 2010s, so I'm a Zoomer, okay? The younger millennials turned to Instagram, he said. Daily cases in India have come off a peak of more than 414,000 new daily infections that was reached on May 7th. Still, experts say the virus is spreading in rural India, where the health infrastructure is not equipped to handle unexpected surges. On Twitter, which has greater influence in India's urban centers compared to rural areas, users have already started collating resources and initiatives to respond to the outbreak in India's countryside. Holy shit. So there's a chart here. So, I mean, when you look at the chart, and so their peak was in September. The first peak that they had was in September 2020. And then it got under control. And then the second wave hit, and it's like, it went from 93,000. That was kind of their peak, 93,000. And then their second wave peak, 390,000. That is bad. But then you look at their death toll, and the death toll so their peak death toll was at 4,000. So I won't go any further, but yeah, there were some interesting images and reports coming out of India, and people were superstitious, and they wanted a cure, and so they just turned to all sorts of different remedies. That's all I have to say, really. But yeah, can't really again, it's very, very interesting just to have seen that. And this is a country with over 1 billion people, 1.4 billion people. So yeah, and who knows what could happen in the next couple of weeks. I mean, it seems like they're getting it under control, but I mean, I got very close to the collapse in the health system. One thing I will add, so I know I've been talking about cryptocurrencies. There was a donation from the Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin, and so essentially he donated a large share of over $1 billion of the Shiba coins that he was gifted from the creators of Shiba Swap. And I've actually been buying up Shiba coin. Really, the whole market is just crashing right now. So it's just a bear market, and honestly, I just want to chill out. I just don't want to buy too much into it, but I can certainly see that this is just a temporary thing, that there are whales just trying to squeeze the wallets, essentially. I know Elon Musk, he tweeted some stuff about Dogecoin and Bitcoin. So yeah, I'm looking at the charts, and like Dogecoin went from like 70 cents to now it's like 28. So on the one hand, I was like freaking out because like I had the car problems that I had to deal with, and I had to sell my Dogecoins, and yeah, I was kind of pissed off because I had to sell. But now that it crashed, I'm not too worried about it. Anyway, but yeah, that was just interesting to see. I mean, a crypto donation put towards COVID relief, COVID resources. So very, very interesting. But yeah, so that's with the India COVID situation. And I wanted to speak on this new situation with Belarus. So with Belarus, we've had the protest over Lukashenko and claims of voter fraud. So a lot of the Belarusians came out in the streets and they got beat up and attacked and abducted by the police, all sorts of things. So a journalist, a anti-authoritarian journalist, who was on a flight, and as they entered, because he's been living outside of Belarus, so as they entered Belarusian airspace, they effectively forced the plane to land so that they could arrest this journalist. I mean, like, they hijacked the plane. And I mean, they got a warplane to escort the plane. So that's pretty serious. So, okay, I'm reading this from CNBC, right? So, quote, or reading, Belarus provoked outrage in the West after one of its warplanes forced a Ryanair flight from Greece to Lithuania to land in Minsk and arrested a passenger, dissident journalist Roman Protasevich. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called it a shocking act. More than 170 were aboard. The plane, on a flight from Athens to the Lithuanian capital Vilnius, was in Belarus airspace when it was intercepted and forced to land in its capital, Minsk. Protasevich, a 26-year-old dissident journalist and passenger on the flight, was then arrested. Belarus, an ally of Russia, said Monday its air traffic controllers could not force the Ryanair flight to land and instead gave the plane's crew recommendations. Oh my good. Yes, we recommend that you land as we escort you with our warplanes. Oh man. I just love the way authoritarians talk. Belarusian state-owned news agency Belta reported that authorities scrambled a MiG-29 fighter jet to divert the flight as it neared the Lithuanian border following orders from strongman President Alexander Lukashenko. Ryanair confirmed that the crew on flight FR 4978 had been notified by Belarusian air traffic control of a potential security threat on the plane. The plane landed and safety checks were carried out, but nothing untoward was found. Yes, they just, there's a security threat. Could you please land? And yeah, there's warplanes escorting you. CNBC contacted the Belarusian Foreign Ministry for comment Monday, but it is yet to receive a reply. However, the ministry's press secretary told Russian news agency RIA that the West was jumping to conclusions, quote, the haste of openly belligerent statements on the part of a number of countries and European structures is striking. The situation is being directly and clearly aggravated, the spokesman said, claiming it was being deliberately politicized. I just love authoritarians when they're caught doing something wrong. They're just like, oh, I can't believe you're causing a scene and you're just being belligerent here. Like, oh, what? So, yes, Western outrage. Protasevich is a co-founder and former editor of the Nexta channel on the social media platform Telegram, a key destination for the political opposition in Belarus. His arrest has provoked outrage in Europe and the US, who called for his immediate release. Nexta attracted the ire of Lukashenko last year after bypassing news blackout. It reported on anti-Lukashenko protests following a general election widely believed to have been rigged in the president's favor. The Belarusian president has denied the election was fixed. Nexta was designated an extremist organization by Belarus last year in November. Belarus asked Poland to extradite Protasevich, who has been living in exile since 2019, to Belarus for what is called his continuing criminal activities and involvement with Nexta and Nexta Live. Journalists, quote, the main target. Frenak Vyakorka is a senior advisor to I can't even say that. I'm sorry. He's a senior advisor to a opposition leader. I'm gonna try to say the first name because it's really like Eastern. It's super Slavic. They're Slavic. Okay. It's Sviatlana. My goodness, Sviatlana. Okay, Sviatlana. Oh wow. Okay. Sviatlana is an opposition leader. So Frenak Vyakorka is a senior advisor to Sviatlana, who is an opposition leader currently in exile in Lithuania. Okay, I'm sorry. He told CNBC on Monday that Protasevich was one of many disruptors challenging Lukashenko's regime. Quote, he was always fighting for justice, and he was the symbol of the young person who disagrees with the government and who wants change, he said. Quote, he's not the only one. Right now, there are 3,000 criminal cases open against young people, journalists, teachers, doctors, but Roman was one of the most vocal, and I think journalists are the main target for the regime right now. Viakorka said he expected that Protasevich would now be in the custody of the KGB and that his safety was potentially at risk. I know for sure that the KGB will not let him go easily, he added. Ryanair's CEO said earlier Monday that he believed that there were KGB agents on board the flight. Oh wow. Yeah, and of course everybody was shocked at this. I mean, this is essentially piracy, but holy crap, that's quite the story. But yeah, so less and less people are, there's been a whole bunch of different airlines just not flying into Belarus right now. So yeah, certainly it's certainly a provocation. But I like that the U.S. was, I saw on Twitter, like the U.S. was criticizing a flight being forced to land, and then somebody pointed to the Bolivian, like essentially the Bolivian Air Force One being forced to land because they suspected that Edward Snowden was on board. So yeah, it's, there's some hypocrisy, but what are you going to do? Yeah, so lastly, in this international segment, I did want to talk about this U.S. pullout from Afghanistan. So yeah, they're just starting to do it, and they're saying that they're at least 16% completed. So they're hoping to get the troops out at least by September, at least by the the anniversary of the September 11th. Right, so I'm reading this from AFP. The U.S. pullout from Afghanistan is at least 16% and as much as a quarter complete, the Pentagon's Central Command said Tuesday. The U.S. military has a deadline of September to remove the 2,500 troops, 16,000 civilian contractors, and hundreds of tons of equipment that were inside Afghanistan at the beginning of this year. Last month, President Joe Biden ordered the exit to bring to a close U.S. on-the-ground involvement in a war that began nearly 20 years ago following the September 11th attacks by Afghanistan-based Al-Qaeda. The Pentagon is being imprecise about the pace of its withdrawal for the security reasons, not wanting to expose itself or others to greater risk from the Taliban insurgents or other groups opposed to the U.S. presence. The Central Command said that it has turned 5 facilities and bases over to the Afghan security forces and removed the equivalent of 160 loaded C-17 transports. The bases handed over include the Kandahar airfield in southern Afghanistan, once the second largest military base in the country for U.S. forces. The Pentagon has sent extra bombers and other assets to the region to ensure U.S. and partner NATO forces remain safe during the withdrawal. The pullout has not halted attacks by Taliban rebels against the Afghan government, its militaries, and civilian targets, but U.S. officials say these attacks are not hindering the withdrawal. So, we'll see, man, how things will unfold, but I'm getting some big, South Vietnam, pulling out, and the northern Vietnamese just walking right into Saigon like, oh, all right. Yeah. Some big vibes there, but I mean, we have to leave because we weren't doing anything there. We didn't set any victory goals, so we're just stuck there. So we just had to leave. So who knows what is going to unfold in the wake of this, and what kind of violence and unrest is going to unfold, because it's certainly going to happen. There's going to be retaliation. Once they realize that once they realize that the U.S. is gone, you're going to see some retaliations and revenge killings. So, yeah, who knows? That's what I wanted to speak on with the international field. And so now we're going to dive into the domestic area and just our general stuff that we're dealing with. So, given now that we're settling into this new administration, the Biden administration, I just find it, it's predictable, really, how everybody's just, back to normal, just not really paying attention. I guess it's complacency, really. Yeah. because essentially Biden is not really delivering on the main progressive issues that they ran on, essentially trying to appeal to the populist left, essentially, if you want to call. But yeah, they're certainly not going to deliver on anything really. No, nothing substantial. No raised minimum wage. No universal health care programs. No. No free education or higher education, free higher education. So, I mean, they might throw us like a freebie, so there might be some programs, and I'm fortunate enough to like file independently, so I do get grants. So I've been fortunate with that. I know I've said that I've been dropping out, but I really more consider this more a break year because I feel like I can pull it through with this next semester. I'm still in good academic standing, so I really like. On the one hand, I just don't want to deal with this, but still, like, I just don't want to be that guy that like, oh, I gave up and I just, at the very least, I can just finish this because I'm really not that far off. So I just need a good, couple semesters to get this done. But who knows what could happen? And honestly, like, it's so close to the brink. We're so close to the brink that like, world events could just transpire, and like I have kind of like an out to be like, well, I couldn't continue because we're now a paramilitary junta. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway. It's so Biden, he's working to just keep the status quo in terms of the establishment, really. I mean, what else can you say? I mean, it's just predictable, and I don't even pay attention to it anymore. I'm just clocked out of all domestic politics, political activism. I just don't really care anymore. So, at the very least, I can talk about the one good thing so far concerning the patent protections. They've come out in favor of that because Bill Gates was having problems with that. So luckily the Biden administration is stepping in. So I'm reading this from MSNBC. The Biden administration announced Wednesday that it will support waiving intellectual property protections for coronavirus vaccines and will move forward with international negotiations to do so, arguing that the global health crisis calls for extraordinary measures. Quote, the administration believes strongly in intellectual property protections, but in service of ending this pandemic, supports the waiver of those protections for COVID-19 vaccines, end quote. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai said in a statement, the announcement is a breakthrough particularly for developing nations that have sought a waiver, saying it would allow them to boost a coronavirus response amid a surge in infections in India and South America. And some other developments. So there was one point, a federal judge in D.C. ruled on Wednesday that the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention had exceeded its legal authority when it issued a nationwide eviction moratorium last spring. So I guess we're, you're going to get evicted if you're not, paying it. Yeah, man. India announced a record number of deaths over the past 24 hours on Wednesday with 3,780 fatalities. A quarter of the world's COVID-19 deaths in the past week have been in India. The CDC released new data on Wednesday that the U.S. birth rate in 2020 dropped for the sixth consecutive year to its lowest point since the government began tracking it. So you can imagine, people that just can't afford kids right now, so that's also going down. And then there's also studies about sperm count that I'll have to highlight later on. It's pretty alarming just how fertility is going to be on the decline in the future. Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg announced Wednesday that the country will launch verifiable vaccine certificates in early June that will allow holders to gain entry to events, that European Union compliant certificates could happen by late June, Reuters reported. Canada became the first country in the world to authorize the use of Pfizer BioNTech vaccine for children between 12 and 15 on Wednesday. The United States is entering a, quote, new phase of its coronavirus vaccine strategy. President Biden announced setting a goal of ensuring that 70% of the U.S. adults have received at least one shot by July 4th. New cases in the United States dropped below 50,000 a day on average for the first time since early October, in a sign that vaccinations and warmer weather may be helping to get the U.S. outbreak under control. And then here's also some goals that the Biden administration has. So President Biden is once again setting exceedingly modest pandemic goals, yet it may be smart given the signs that vaccine demand appears to be on a serious decline in the United States. By July 4th, Biden wants 70% of adult Americans to have received at least one coronavirus vaccine shot and 60% of U.S. adults to be fully vaccinated. That's roughly 160 million people. Right now, 106 million Americans are fully vaccinated. So at the current rate, a total of 195 million Americans could be fully vaccinated by July 4th. It seems certain that the current vaccination rate will continue to decline. Daily vaccinations have been falling for the past 3 weeks, an unsettling development for both the White House and public health officials, who had hoped to make more progress on vaccinating the public before reaching the point at which supply outstrips demand. So definitely, if you've already done the first shot, don't forget to do the second shot. Yeah, I don't know if it was like a placebo thing, but I certainly kind of felt something when I took the shot initially. When they tell you to sit down for 15 minutes, I was kind of just like, this is kind of, I don't know. I guess my body was kind of just reacting to it. But yeah, I mean, who knows? I was just black-pilled, really. I've just really lost faith in all the institutions. But you know what? I'm usually a scientifically minded person, so vaccinations, I'm not anti-vax at all. So I'm just enough people have taken it, and they haven't really. A small percentage of people have had reactions. I mean, that's normal with most vaccinations. So yeah, I just did it, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm doing my part, but yeah, I would just leave it at your own discretion, really. Because it kind of would have made sense for me if I didn't vaccinate myself, because I'm already kind of reclusive socially. So I mean, that's how I avoided getting sick. But even then, you might open yourself up. So it's just better to do it. Anyway, so that's at least the goal that the U.S. administration has set right now. And, at the very least, in terms of the coronavirus response, Biden is, excelling in that area. But, the Trump set the bar pretty low. So, yeah, that's what that's what I, have to say about the Trump administration. It just kind of revealed the mask of our incompetence. It was just a moment of mass psychosis, really, if you think about it. I think most Americans are going to try to whitewash it and just try to avoid it, avoid talking about it, which is the very opposite thing that you're supposed to do, because we're opening ourselves up to a new Trump, a worse Trump. I mean, I was talking about Matt Gaetz in the last episode about his current scandal right now and his legal battles, and I read this in passing, so I have to verify it because it's so ridiculous that I can't believe it. But he said that he's considering running for 2024, and honestly, at this rate, why not? Because, oh my goodness, this is the end game. So that's also another reason why I'm thinking, okay, maybe I can continue with my education, and because I got 3 more years actually. It's 2021. I got a couple more years before the next presidential elections, before things get really bad, and I can probably get my degree and dip on out. I just gotta find my escape plan. I'm thinking New Zealand. it's not too bad. But that's, if I can get in, if I have a degree, my chances of emigration are, exponentially greater. So anyway, I was getting distracted because I was talking about Biden and this administration, but this coronavirus response, or the patent protections, is certainly a plus and certainly good. But we'll just have to see, because this COVID-19 might be slowing down, but we don't know, because there's certainly talks of mutated forms being detected. So with that being said, we have the executive branch under the Biden administration, under the Democrats. But the real legal battles are, of course, in the legislative branches, and in terms of the Congress and our Senate and House of Representatives. And lately they've been trying to set up a independent commission on the Capitol insurrection, the January 6th insurrection, and effectively the Republicans have killed it, because they try to do a bipartisan push, I guess. I mean, I'm pretty sure Biden could just do his own in commission, but then the Republicans would just come out and say, oh, it's too biased, or yeah. So this was the independent one, and the Republicans also killed that. So I'm reading from Esquire, and what they are pointing out is that many of the Republicans are choosing to kill this commission because they don't want to harm their chances of re-election in the midterms. And I'm telling you this, we're going to see a repeat of the Obama administration, but I'm telling you that the red wave is going to be worse, and we have to prepare ourselves. I mean, I'm going to have to see on the local level what I'm dealing with, because that's really what the midterms are for. But really, try to do your part. Because I'm not really trying to be socially or politically active. I mean, I'm just a podcaster. I mean, I just want to smoke pot and chill out. But yeah, this is something that is going to be a real problem for the next midterms. And as they're pointing out, they're killing this commission to protect their asses. So reading from Esquire, Senate Republicans on Friday blocked the creation of a bipartisan commission to investigate the January 6th deadly insurrection on the Capitol, in which a mob of Trump supporters attempted to overthrow democracy and prevent the certification of the 2020 presidential election. 5 people were killed during the insurrection, including a Capitol officer, and nearly 200 were injured. 6 Republicans voted in favor of the bill. They include Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska, Senator Suzanne Collins of Maine, Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, and Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana. Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania said he would have supported the bill, but he wasn't present for the vote. And also, on a side note, Kristen Sinema also wasn't present for that vote, so hats off to her. I wonder if she would have, given the thumbs up or thumbs down, Anyway, so, even if he had been, it wouldn't have mattered. The final tally, 54 to 35, fell 6 short of the 60 necessary votes to overcome the Republican filibuster. So, most people either abstained or just weren't present. This isn't. Oh my goodness gracious. It has since been widely reported that the main reason Republicans opposed the creation of the commission is because they feared it would hurt their chances in the upcoming midterm elections. And by widely reported, I mean Senator John Thune of South Dakota admitted as much to CNN when he said, quote, "I want our midterm message to be on the kinds of things that the American people are dealing with. That's jobs and wages and the economy and national security, safe streets, strong borders, not relighting the 2020 elections," end quote. Thune continued, quote, "A lot of our members, and I think this is true of a lot of House Republicans, want to be moving forward and not looking backward. Anything that gets us rehashing the 2020 elections, I think, is a day loss on being able to draw a contrast between us and the Democrats very radical left-wing agenda, end quote. Multiple Republicans who voted no admitted that without the work of an independent commission, important questions would go unanswered, but they argued that an independent commission's efforts would be duplicative of the current Senate committee investigations. Unfortunately, though, neither the Rules nor the Homeland Security Senate committees are looking into events leading up to the insurrection. Instead, they are focused on day of security breakdowns that information will not help identify and eliminate a threat before it happens. The failure to form a bipartisan commission after, of all things, a terrorist attack marks a new low in the seemingly bottomless well of divisiveness that is the United States Senate. For the past century, and despite deep partisan divisions, American politicians on multiple occasions have managed to come together in the wake of a devastating tragedy to determine what went wrong. The most famous example of this is the 9/11 Commission, which the January 6th Commission was modeled after, but there have been plenty others. In 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson created the Warren Commission to investigate the assassination of former President Kennedy. There was also the World War II era Roberts Commission that investigated the attack on Pearl Harbor. By failing to follow in the footsteps of these other bipartisan commissions, some of which were related to foreign terrorist attacks, some domestic like the January 6th insurrection, today's Republican senators have put party over politics at a level so high it should terrify us all. The worst is certainly yet to come. So, I mean, you know, I got people like my parents who constantly tell me, oh, well, you know, you're wasting your money. I mean, wasting my money on, you know, weapons and shit. And then I see shit like this from the Republicans, and I'm just led to believe, like, what else what else am I supposed to do if I'm in, like, the heartland of Republican, Trump land, you know, and I really don't have any means to leave? My goodness, man. But never mind that. It tells you something that the Republicans are beholden to such a vile group of people. And I don't mean really like, I don't know, because I really want to see the good in people. You know, I'm a friendly guy. You know, I do like Southern people. I don't hate, like, Southern white folks. Like, I love them if they're cool with me. But damn, dude, like, you guys make it kind of hard sometimes, you know, because you pull shit like this off. Like, oh my goodness. But yeah, man. Yeah, dude. So we're just gonna have to see how this unfolds. But yeah, this was a test run. But I feel like if somehow, because this is like the worst case scenarios, if somehow these Trump MAGA people pull off some kind of insurrection and actually, like, grab, like, a pretty good chunk of territory and say, like, the Appalachian Mountains or something, right? And they form an enclave, separate state insurrection, I feel like it would just fall apart pretty quickly, like it did here. I don't know. Because, I mean, I'm not saying that they're not going to fight well, but in terms of, like, governing, that could become an issue. But who knows? So, I mean, because look at Chaz. I mean, that fell apart pretty quickly also. So, yeah. Anyway. So that's the commission that we had that's gone now. And we also had some guidelines come out from the CDC because we were just talking about the vaccination and the goals that this administration set. And so there was some confusion that came out that people had about masks. People said that they're still going to wear masks because what Fauci had said is that if you're fully vaccinated, for the most part, you're more than likely to continue unmasked in most public events, most public or indoor events. So for myself personally, I feel like I'm just going to wear a mask more often. But, you know, once I get my full shot, I'll certainly be more open to outdoor events or public events. To be honest, I've never really been a fan of, like, clubs or anything. Like, I already had, like, one experience where we were just like a bunch of sardines. Like, I'm just sitting here like, if there's a fire, we're all dead. I'm just like, so yeah, I usually avoid those kind of situations to begin with, but it will feel nice once I get fully vaccinated to be more out and open, especially for school, because I do far better with in-person classes, um, and it'll be easier to pick up a chick, So I'm just saying, it'll be nice to go back to normal in that sense. So yeah, here we go. So for CBS News, right? So Dr. Anthony Fauci, chief medical advisor to President Biden, said Sunday that updated mask guidance for Americans who are fully vaccinated against COVID-19 was, quote, based on the evolution of the science, end quote, as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, learn more about the real-world effectiveness of the shots. Quote, the underlying reason for the CDC doing this was just based on the evolution of the science, end quote. Fauci said in an interview with Face the Nation on last week's announcement, quote, but if in fact this serves as an incentive for people to get vaccinated, all the better. I hope it does actually, end quote. The CDC said Thursday that anyone who is fully vaccinated can shed their mask and forego social distancing for most indoor and outdoor events, regardless of gathering size, marking a substantial return to normalcy in the long fight against the coronavirus pandemic. In the wake of the new guidance from the health agency, the White House lifted its own mask requirement for fully vaccinated staff. While the new guidance from the CDC was largely celebrated, it did bring some confusion. As the agency said last month, Americans who have been fully vaccinated against the coronavirus were still safer wearing masks in crowded outdoor settings and inside. Fauci said 3 factors drove the change from health officials: an accumulation of data showing the, quote, real-world effectiveness of the vaccines, which are more than 90% effective in protecting against disease. New studies showing the vaccines protect against the new coronavirus variants, and information showing it's unlikely a vaccinated person who becomes infected with the coronavirus transmits it to someone else. Quote, the accumulation of all these scientific facts, information, and evidence brought the CDC to make the decision to say now when you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask, not only outdoors, but you don't need to wear it indoors, he said. Fauci said he expects the CDC will release more specific guidance in the coming weeks about the need for mitigation measures for fully vaccinated people, in particular settings like the workplace. While there is the possibility that people who have been vaccinated can test positive for the coronavirus, as evidenced by the 8 vaccinated members of the New York Yankees who contracted the virus, Fauci said the likelihood of it spreading is, quote, very, very low. Quote, what the issue is that the level of virus in your nasal pharynx, which is correlated with whether or not you were going to transmit it to someone else, is considerably lower, end quote, he said. Quote, so even though there are breakthrough infections with vaccinated people, almost always the person is asymptomatic and the level of virus is so low, it makes it extremely unlikely, not impossible, but very, very low likelihood that they're going to transmit it. Nearly 47% of the adult population in the U.S. is fully vaccinated, according to the CDC. Nearly 60% of the adult population has received at least 1 dose. The vaccination rate is expected to increase following the FDA's authorization this week for use of Pfizer 2-dose shot in adolescents between 12 and 15. The CDC reported 43.5% of the population over the age of 12 is fully vaccinated. As supply of the vaccines has outpaced demand, the Biden administration has rolled out new incentives designed to boost vaccination rates, including partnering with ride-sharing companies Uber and Lyft for free rides to vaccination sites and offering a tax incentive to some businesses who offer paid leave for employees to get their shots and recover from side effects. Fauci said the data also indicates getting vaccinated against the coronavirus serves the public's interest as well. When you get vaccinated, you not only protect your own health and that of the family, but also you contribute to the community health by preventing the spread of the virus throughout the community, he said. In other words, you become a dead end to the virus, and when you are a lot of dead ends, and when there are a lot of dead ends, the virus is not going to go anywhere. Yeah, so, you know, I was kind of just holding out for herd immunity, but honestly, I live in Texas, so yeah, it's just better to get the shot, because rural Texas is not going to be too kind to the virus. I'm not no guinea pig, so yeah. So definitely do your shots, and that way you can just go about and you can make sure you've been brushing your teeth. That's all I got to say. So you can just smile at people, smile at folks, and just howdy. So yeah, I do kind of miss smiling at people because you're just kind of like you're kind of just looking at them like, oh yeah. So yeah, man. So anyway, moving on. So as you may have heard, from I guess different businesses, they've been complaining about a shortage of workers. I mean, it's not as though people are low on cash though, but people, they're overworked, and I certainly feel this. They've burned out. I mean, I've told myself that I can't. If you hear it meowing, I just rescued a little kitten, so I'm just gonna have to go through it because I already just gave her some attention. So yeah, these workers, they're worked to the bone. They're working wages that don't meet the current standard of living, and they're constantly degraded on on a human level. I mean, like, I can't tell you how many jobs I've worked at where people treated me like I was like retarded or something. I mean, I'm not saying that I probably have like some like either dyslexia. I mean, and then also I might be autistic because I am socially awkward. Like, there's so many different like untreated like mental disorders that I've had that I'm just coming to realize. I'm just not really in the position to just deal with it, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But it just sucks because in a lot of these positions they're expecting you to be on the fly and catch all these different social cues, and yeah, man, like I just can't do it. Like I'm sorry, because especially like server positions and stuff, you have to constantly just be like, oh, how are you? Hi, hey. But my point really overall is that people just had enough, and they're not paying enough. I'm sorry, like if you're working a server position, you're usually working like $2 or $5 if you're lucky. Then you're going off tip shares, and that's just not enough. And then you have to work 40 plus hours, but even 40 hours isn't enough. It might keep the roof over your head, but then you also have to pay for gas and food, and then you also have to have savings for emergencies, and then also you're bombarded with all these advertisements, and you want to have fun and let off some steam, but you're barely making enough to keep a roof over your head, and that usually what is that's usually what reinforces addictive behaviors, because people are so deprived, and then they actually have some money that they can put aside to save, but since they're working themselves to the bones, they're like, you know what, I'm gonna treat myself, and then they go do what they need to do to take the edge off. But it's like poverty reinforces a lot of these negative impulsive behaviors, and a lot of people are just fed up. They would rather just chill at home and collect whatever unemployment check they can, and they'd rather stay at home and be poor rather than working themselves to death, so that's just the point that we're at. So it's kind of like a silent strike, really. That's the way I've kind of perceived it. I'm just like, I'm not really gonna put my body on the line for anymore for minimum wage. Like, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. But yeah, I just have to find a way to pay the bills every month, and hope that my crypto investments pay off. Anyway, but that's speaking on the worker shortage. Some places are beginning to raise their wages, but it needs to be like a government like enforced like federal wage, which isn't happening. and they're not. They already gave up on it. That's my whole point, and we're already seeing the ramifications of it. But people just don't understand. Like all these people that talk to me about my financial discipline. I mean, it's not that they're incorrect. It's like when people are telling you like, hey, you have to breathe to, survive. You have to drink water and eat, to survive. It's like, yes, I get it, but like, this is different, like, with finances. And then like, I wouldn't be wasting my money on all the survival and tactical equipment if I wasn't surrounded by so much chaos. And yeah, so anyway, that's beside the point. But we have this worker shortage and people just fed up. But this really needs to get out in the streets. There really needs to be a push with activism for a raised wage. And we did see it. It was a bit underreported, but there was a strike among McDonald's employees for $15 minimum wage. So who knows how far that will go. But it has to be regulated. It has to be federally enforced. So we'll have to see that. So moving on, I was also talking about Israel earlier and just how the United States props it up, and I was mentioning about these apocalyptic prophecies of Armageddon, and it's just you realize that how intertwined like a lot of these religion and geopolitics, and how we're still very much like in this medieval mindset, and what Biden, he's certainly in line with the mindset of the Zionist expansion into I guess Gaza. I mean, not Gaza, the West Bank. He hasn't exactly spoken out against the annexations, but I mean, there are a violation of international law. But I mean, Joe Biden also called himself a Zionist at one point. So I mean, this isn't, this is certainly in line with what he said. He's already like told you all what he's about all this time, about, and certainly in terms of the judicial system, in terms of the drug war, and now with this conflict, Israel. I mean, yeah, man. I mean, I don't see how he's really no different than a Republican. I just don't. He's really a Dixiecrat if you really think about it. Like, that's really what he is. Anyway, so I'm going to read from BBC News about the military aid that the United States gives to Israel. President Biden is facing questions from some in his Democratic Party about the amount of aid the U.S. sends to Israel. Senator Bernie Sanders has said the U.S. must take a hard look at how the money is spent. So what does Israel get and what is it used for? How much aid does the U.S. give? In 2020, the U.S. gave $3.8 billion in aid to Israel, part of a long-term yearly commitment made under the Obama administration. Almost all of this aid was for the military assistance. This support came as part of an agreement signed by former President Barack Obama in 2016 for an overall package of $38 billion in military aid over the decade of 2017 and 2028. This represents an increase of about 6% adjusted for inflation over the spending commitment for the previous decade. And then you see the chart, and it's only just grown. It's just so like we've continued to escalate our aid to Israel through the decade. So it's very obvious where our position is through all this. And this is and the chart that I'm seeing, it doesn't include missile defense. So 38 billion, and that's not in missile defense. So man. On top of this, last year the U.S. gave $5 million towards resettling migrants in Israel. The country has a long-standing policy of accepting Jews from other parts of the world as citizens. How has Israel used U.S. money? Over the years, U.S. aid has helped Israel develop one of the most advanced militaries in the world, with the funds allowing them to purchase sophisticated military equipment from the U.S. For example, Israel has purchased 50 F-35 combat aircraft, which can be used for missile attacks. 27 of the aircraft have so far been delivered, costing around $100 million. Last year, Israel also bought 8 KC-46A Boeing Pegasus aircrafts for an estimated $2.4 billion. These are capable of refueling planes such as F-35 in midair. Of the $3.8 billion given to Israel in 2020, $500 million was for missile defense, including investments in Israel's Iron Dome and other systems which can intercept incoming rockets. Since 2011, the U.S. has contributed a total of $1.6 billion to the Iron Dome defense system. In addition, Israel has spent millions collaborating with the U.S. on developing military technology, such as a system to detect underground tunnels used to infiltrate Israel. The Israeli government invests heavily in military equipment and training, using the aid to compensate for being smaller than many other regional powers. How does this compare with other countries? Since World War II, Israel has been the largest overall recipient of U.S. foreign aid. In 2019, the most recent year to publish fully reported figures, Israel was the second highest recipient of U.S. aid after Afghanistan, according to USAID. And a lot of the money given to Afghanistan has gone towards supporting the U.S. military's efforts to stabilize the country, which has been engulfed by war since the U.S. invasion in 2001. But with U.S. forces set to leave Afghanistan by September, only $307 million has been requested for 2021. Israel receives by far the most money in the Middle East. Egypt and Jordan are also major recipients of U.S. aid. Both have their own peace deals with Israel, having once fought wars with it. They each received around $1.5 billion worth of U.S. aid in 2019. Meanwhile, President Biden has restored some funding, $235 million, for the UN agency which helps Palestinian refugees. This funding was cut by the Trump administration in 2018. So they continue on about U.S. U.S. goals in the Middle East with Israel, and they talk about, they're both democratic and blah blah blah. So I mean, they're a bit sympathetic, obviously, and biased towards Israel, but yeah, it's very much in line, very much to do with just the prophecies of Armageddon and Jews in control. By extent, if the evangelicals can control Israel, then in extension they can be a part of the rapture or whatever. Yeah, it's all weird. It's all messed up. It's just religion. So yeah, that's really what's going on with our aid, and nobody really spoke out against it. The U.S. certainly isn't going to do anything about it, so it's really on businesses to boycott and sanction, really. I mean, hopefully we can get in a more critical, candidate, but I mean, it's going to be so hard because the Israeli lobbies are so powerful, and the largest pro-Israel lobby isn't even Jewish. So this is the doomsday prophecy. This is what it's all about. So again, just keeping an eye on it, and this Gaza conflict is just gonna burn on. Really, that's really what's gonna happen. Palestine and Israel is gonna continue to lob rockets at each other. I mean, if you think about it, this conflict is convenient for the Likud right-wing government, even though this new coalition is now being elected in, from what I'm understanding. But it's so beneficial to the right wing in Israel, the conflict and the constant attacks. And it's also beneficial to Hamas when they keep getting bombed, and the Israelis are disproportionate in their retaliation. So it's just the violence just further radicalizes and reinforces the fringes of each respective group. So it's just who knows? I mean, the only way this ends is with Gaza getting wiped out, or the people getting displaced, because there's really no other way that this is going to end, because Israel's too powerful. And I mean, they would have to be like, Israel would have to like collapse internally in a lot of ways, like we almost saw with the race riots. But yeah, I was watching a geography video on Israel and their geopolitics, and the country is just so small that like if they lose a hill, that means everything. So like that's their whole attitude. It's like they're willing to die for every inch. So in a lot of ways you got to respect it, but it's like this ethno nationalist Zionist attitude. It has to go. Like, I'm sorry, we can't deal with this. So yeah. So that's really all I wanted to talk about domestically, and I was talking about tying it in with Israel Palestine conflict. But yeah, so just interesting turn of events for us here in the good old US of A. But now I wanted to talk about more natural events. We're in the Anthropocene epoch, just experiencing the runaway effects of climate change. Right now, we're in my local area, from what I'm observing, is that we're just getting a lot of rain. So out west, on the west coast in California, they're experiencing a huge drought. And I'll talk about that in a bit, but they're getting a big drought, worse drought than last year. And last year was bad, so this year it's going to be so terrible. But then we have the Gulf Coast, a lot of the Midwest plains areas, a lot of severe storms. We've had some rains and flash floods out here. So yeah, those bayous, they're already kind of filled up a bit. Right now, I mean, we have some sunshine, and so going out and getting work done is pretty easy. But from what I can see in the forecast, we're anticipating more rain, and already I'm seeing preliminary reports of a possible hurricane in the Gulf. So I don't know, most of the preliminary data shows some kind of system hitting to either Texas or Louisiana in the next 2 weeks. So yeah, that's something that I am certainly keeping an eye on. I have all my emergency water filled up, so I'm certainly prepared in that respect. But I can just hope that the rain that we do get is just either light shower or just calm rains. Because yeah, we've had some downpours, we've had some torrential rains, and already like these neighborhoods already getting flooded. So like a hurricane is going to be really bad for us right now. Like they were saying a category 3. So if it's a category 3, and already we're dealing with flooding problems, like my goodness. So I'm going to have to see about my mom, whether she should come up here to me. This is more of a hill country, so a lot of the waters will just clear out. But yeah, again, this is what we have to live with. Some people just didn't pay attention to the winter storm, and now we're getting into hurricane season, which if you're not ready for a hurricane in the Gulf Coast, then I don't know what to do for you, man. So yeah, again, I don't want to sound like patronizing, like, oh, I told you so, but like, come on, like, it's just like, people are just so, they're disassociated from events. They don't want to think about it because it makes them sad, and everybody wants to be happy, so nobody wants to be in touch with the existential realities that we face. And yeah, so we'll have to see. I will say this much: I prefer excessive rain over dry, conditions, bone dry conditions, with just the slightest like cigarette, like somebody just throws away a cigarette and the whole county burns down. Again, people were doing gender reveal parties, and we saw what happened there. Like I had to write an opinion piece on the fire, but I was focused on the climate change angle and my opinions on how are we going to deal with this crisis that's already burning us down, and this is going to certainly get worse. But the editor, he kept trying to focus more on my thoughts on the gender reveal, my thoughts on gender, and I'm just like, dude, I'm sorry, like, this is not that important right now. Like, this is what I mean about the blue check, like, liberal identity politics. I'm like, I'm just like, you're focused on the wrong thing. It's not that it's, I'm sorry. I just got, flustered, and I'm just so glad I don't have to deal with that. I hope that I don't have to deal with that as I continue on. That was like my main reason for being turned off with like internships and like just corporate media in general. Like, I'm just gonna do whatever I can to get my degree and then step, because I'm not dealing with this, especially if it's unpaid. Like, come on. So we have the flooding threats, the hurricane threats that we have in the United States, or in the Gulf Coast, in the Houston area in particular, because we're extremely susceptible to flooding. Because if you look at the footage of Hurricane Harvey, like it looked like an ocean, like the city was under an ocean. So who knows? Maybe under climate change, Houston's gonna be under that under the sea. Who knows? Or at least not fully under the sea, but just So anyway, talking about that, in terms of climate change, we also have the drought conditions that are accelerating in the West, in California, and just how fire officials are worried about the possibility of an extremely dangerous fire season. So, reading from the AP, Associated Press, as bad as last year's record-shattering firestorm was, the western U.S. starts this year's in even worse shape. The soil in the West is record dry for this time of year. In much of the region, plants that fuel fires are also the driest scientists have seen. The vegetation is primed to ignite, especially in the Southwest, where dead juniper trees are full of flammable needles. It's like having gasoline out there, said Brian Steinhardt, Forest Fire Zone Manager for Prescott and Coconino National Forests in Arizona. A climate change-fueled megadrought of more than 20 years is making conditions that lead to fire even more dangerous, scientists said. Rainfall in the Rockies and farther west was the second lowest on record in April, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It means that the dice are loaded toward a lot of forest fire this year, said Park Williams, a UCLA climate and fire scientist, who calculated that soil in the western half of the nation is the driest it has been since 1895. This summer, we're going into fire season with drier fuel than we were at this time last year. In addition, the western drought is deepening week by week. In late March, less than 1/3 of California was suffering extreme or exceptional drought. Now, more than 73% is, according to the National Drought Monitor, which is based on precipitation, temperature, soil moisture, and stream flow measurements. A year ago, heading into the record-smashing 2020 fire year, when more than 4% of California burned, just 3% of the state was in extreme or exceptional drought. But the outlook is much worse elsewhere. I think the Southwest is really primed for a bad fire season, University of Utah fire scientist Phil Dennison said. That's because last year's normal monsoon season, which brings much of the year's rainfall, never showed up. A year ago, none of Arizona, Nevada, and Utah was in extreme or exceptional drought. Now, more than 90% of Utah, 86% of Arizona, and 75% of Nevada is in those highest drought categories. According to the Drought Monitor, New Mexico jumped from 4% extreme or exceptional drought a year ago to now more than 77%. UCLA meteorologist Daniel Swain, who also works for the National Center for Atmospheric Research and the Nature Conservancy, said key factors going into fire season are soil and plant wetness. So is soil moisture very low? Is vegetation extremely dry? Absolutely yes. Unequivocally yes. Pretty much everywhere in California and the Southwest, Swain said, quote, so that box is checked big time in a way that is going to massively increase the potential background flammability given a spark, given extreme weather conditions, end quote. This doesn't necessarily ensure that the 2021 fire season will be worse than 2020. Last year, more than 15,800 square miles of the United States burned, an area about the size of Maryland and Delaware combined. Several scientists said last year's fires were stoked not just by hot, dry conditions, but by unusual situations that made a bad year horrific. Two intense heat waves, one that nearly set a record for hottest temperature on Earth in Death Valley, set the stage, and a freak California lightning barrage provided a lot of sparks. The lightning outbreak was the type that has happened only a few times in history and is unlikely to occur 2 years in a row, Swain said. Maybe it won't be the hottest summer, he said, adding, I'm really grasping at straws here. All we have going for us is dumb luck. When the scientists see extremely dry or dying trees, they get even more worried. In Arizona, junipers are succumbing to the 20-year drought and its 2-year intensification, said Joel McKillen, a forest health zone leader for the U.S. Forest Service there. Officials haven't done a precise count, but anecdotally, the die-off is 5% to 30%, with some patches up to 60%. So yeah, so it's pretty serious, this drought. And if you look at the maps, I mean, it's significant, the level of extreme conditions there are. Yeah, it's going to be bad, and this is just the beginning. So who knows? I mean, again, I gotta find some respiratory protection in case of smoke inhalation, because if enough smoke is burning from those drought conditions, it could really affect the air quality for the whole of the U.S. So yeah, man, we just gotta look out for that. But as I said, in my local area, we're getting plenty of rain, probably too much rain pretty soon. So again, I'd much rather deal with flooding than drought and fire. That's all I have to say with that. But both suck. So I'm not downplaying the severity. But yeah. But in spite of all the doom climate news that we're getting, here's a shed of light. Although it might be bittersweet, it might be naive thinking that this will be enough. It's something, and it's a start. So, reading from the AP, they highlight that a Royal Dutch Shell company has to cut emissions by 40% by 2030. And this could set a precedent for further regulations for carbon emissions and such, and getting our industrial activity under control. So so a Dutch court on Wednesday ordered Royal Dutch Shell to cut its carbon emissions by net 45% by 2030 compared to 2019 levels in a landmark case brought by climate activism groups, which hailed the decision as a victory for the planet. The Hague District Court ruled that the Anglo-Dutch energy giant has a duty of care to reduce emissions and that its current reduction plans were not concrete enough. The decision could set a precedent for similar cases against polluting multinationals around the world. Activists gathered around the courtroom erupted into cheers as the decision was read out loud. Quote, "The climate won today," said Roger Cox, a lawyer for the Dutch arm of Friends of the Earth, which was one of the organizations behind the case. Quote, "This ruling will change the world. Worldwide, people are in the starting blocks to take legal action against oil companies following our example," Cox added. The Hague court did not say how Royal Dutch Shell should achieve the ordered cutback, saying the energy giant's parent company, quote, "has complete freedom in how it meets its reduction obligation and in shaping the Shell corporate policy." In a written reaction, Shell said it expects to appeal, quote, "the disappointing court decision." So they're sad that they can't pollute the planet anymore, but too bad. Yeah, so the company said it is already, quote, "investing billions of dollars in low carbon energy, including electric vehicle charging, hydrogen renewables, and biofuels. We want to grow demand for these products and scale up our new energy businesses even more quickly." At a hearing in December, Shell lawyer Dennis Horman said a ruling against the company could create a situation, quote, "in which countless parties can hold each other accountable for their role in that energy transition through the courts, and gives judges a central role in active and delicate political process." Shell says it has, quote, "set an ambition to be a net zero emissions energy business by 2050 or sooner." The court said in an English language summary of its ruling that Shell was not currently in breach of its obligations to reduce emissions, as environmental groups had argued, because the parent company was tightening its emissions policy. But it ruled that Shell's policies, quote, "is not concrete, has many caveats, and is based on monitoring social developments rather than the company's own responsibility for achieving a CO2 reduction." Quote, "Therefore, the court has ordered RDS to reduce the emissions of the Shell Group, its suppliers, and its customers by net 45 as compared to 2019 levels by the end of 2030 through the corporate policy of the Shell Group." A group of 7 environmental and human rights organizations and some 17,000 Dutch citizens filed the case in 2018, calling on the court to order Shell to cut emissions in line with the global goals set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. That equates to Shell cutting emissions 45% by 2030. The court ruled on the claim by 6 of the group. The case in the Netherlands is the latest in a string of legal challenges filed around the world by climate activists seeking action to rein in emissions, but it is believed to be the first targeting a multinational company. One of the first successful climate cases also was in the Netherlands, where the Supreme Court 2 years ago upheld a 2015 ruling requiring the government to cut emissions at least 25% by the end of 2020 from benchmark 1990 levels. In February, a Paris court ruled that the French government had failed to take sufficient action to fight climate change in a case brought by 4 non-governmental organizations. Last month, Germany top court said the federal government must set clear goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Donald Pols, director of Friends of the Earth Netherlands, called the ruling in The Hague, quote, "a monumental victory for our planet, for our children, and a big leap towards a livable future for everyone." So that's some good news in that sense. Climate-wise, it's a start. Europe is certainly doing their part to step away from fossil fuels. I'm not sure how serious Biden is about stepping away from fossil fuels. He certainly is signaling that he does believe in climate change at the very least, so that's a help. But you can say a certain thing and then there's actually following through and enforcing emissions regulations. So we'll have to see how we follow through with that, because we're the main emitter. And then also you have to look at China as well. They're the other emitter. I know people constantly point to them, they're working on their infrastructure and, they're certainly doing their own projects, but they still have plenty of coal factories and yeah. So who knows how that's going to work out. But again, my whole mindset now is even if we do like make significant cutbacks in emissions, the climate effects that have already been building up are going to drastically affect climate and the climate and just weather patterns and like, yeah, man. As I said, right now things are very calm in my area, but as we get this rain coming in, because the radar just shows rain for the next week or so, it could just demonstrate further that it's going to increase and become more, severe. And yeah. So we have that. And I also wanted to talk about, because we've been talking about the COVID crisis, I also want to talk about just how susceptible we are to further pandemics. Because really COVID, we got pretty lucky because it's still bad. Don't get me wrong. It's bad. It's a bad virus, but we could have certainly got something worse. So we're now seeing just certain bugs pop up, right? So I'm reading from IFL Science, and they're talking about cases of avian flu being found around the world, including in the U.S. So, that's certainly an area to look out for. So in recent decades, dozens of countries across the world have seen cases of poultry and wild birds falling sick with influenza A, H5N8, a highly pathogenic avian influenza virus. The subtype of flu was not generally associated with human infections, but that changed in February 2021 when 7 poultry farm workers in southern Russia became the first documented human cases of H5N8 bird flu. Writing in Science, scientists from the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Shandong First Medical University warned that H5N8 has demonstrated that it can leap from species to species and holds the potential to erupt into quote, a disastrous pandemic. Quote, at least 46 countries have reported highly pathogenic H5N8 outbreaks. The researchers write, the global spread of AIVs, particularly the H5N8 subtype, has become a major concern to poultry farming and wildlife security, but critically also to global health. Avian flu strains are able to hop around the world through the migration of wild birds. If the virus then manages to make its way into a poultry farm, an outbreak can easily take root, often resulting in the death or culling of millions of birds. The, quote, strain of the virus that managed in Russia belongs to H5N8 AIV clade 2344b, which is a branch on the family tree clade 234. The clade 234 was first isolated from a domestic duck at a wet market in Jiangsu, China in 2010, and has become increasingly dominant across the world in the past 2 decades. After first picking up in Jiangsu, routine surveillance studies then showed the clade started to spring up in neighboring countries before eventually making its way to wider Asia and Europe. Outbreaks among birds have now been seen across the world, including the US, UK, mainland Europe, India, Israel, South Korea, Mongolia, China, Japan, Russia, Nigeria, South Africa, and more. As mentioned, there have only been a very small number of cases in humans. In the case of the recent Russian outbreak, all the patients remained asymptomatic, according to the World Health Organization. While there was some speculation that human-to-human transmission may occur, health authorities currently say the risk of infection is low. As per the new paper in Science, H5N8 has the potential to cause serious trouble for global public health. However, it isn't all bad news. The researchers argue that there is still opportunity to prevent a potential H5N8 pandemic. COVID-19 has brought the always existing threat of a global virus outbreak into very real terms and helped to refine much of the world's measures to control and contain disease outbreaks. But this shouldn't make us complacent. To negate the risk of H5N8 and other potentially troublesome flu strains, they argue the world needs to see major changes to agriculture as well as the surveillance of emerging diseases. So we're certainly not out of, this viral threat. And unfortunately, I think as we continue on, it's just going to get worse and worse, because they point to biodiversity loss having a link towards disease outbreaks. Essentially, with our overdependence to agriculture, that's mainly why we get sick, is from diseases that hop from species to species. So yeah, man, it's gonna be messed up. You can imagine like a cyberpunk future where people are living in poverty, homeless, out in the street, like millions of people, really, and then only the top, elites have actual like housing and medical, medicine and food, all the good stuff, and the people at the bottom are, struggling, dying, and there's disease outbreaks every few years, so the population gets cold. So, and then the elites are just like, oh yes, less mouths to feed, more for us. Like, I feel like that's just where we're gonna head towards if we don't, get things under control. But yeah, so that's with the avian flu. And now what they're showing is that Vietnam has detected a new strain of COVID, which is a hybrid between the UK and the Indian strain. So yeah, really they're just showing that it's just more contagious. So, it's the same health effects, but it's just increasing the contagiousness of the virus. Good news is that what they're saying is if you will take the 2 shots and you're fully vaccinated, you'll have a higher chance of fighting it. Again, a lot of people forget that having a vaccine isn't a surefire way to prevent an infection, but once you're fully vaccinated, your body has a better chance of fighting it if you do fall susceptible to the disease. So you'll still get infected, but now your body knows how to fight it. Yeah, so I'm reading from the BBC. Vietnam has detected a COVID variant that appears to be a combination of the Indian and UK variants and can spread quickly by air, officials said. Vietnam's health minister Nguyen Thanh Long described the latest mutation on Saturday as, quote, very dangerous. Viruses mutate all the time, and most variants are inconsequential, but some can make a virus more contagious. Since COVID-19 was first identified in January 2020, thousands of mutations have been detected. Quote, Vietnam has now uncovered a new COVID-19 variant combining characteristics of the 2 existing variants, first found in India and the UK, Mr. Nguyen told a government meeting. According to Reuters news agency, Mr. Nguyen said the new hybrid variant was more transmissible than previously known versions, especially in the air. He said it was discovered after running tests on newly detected patients, online newspaper VN Express reported. He added that the genetic code of the virus would be made available soon. The variant of COVID-19 first identified in India last October, called B16172, is more transmissible than the UK Kent variant, also known as B117, according to experts. Research suggests that vaccines such as Pfizer and AstraZeneca jabs are highly effective against the Indian variant after 2 doses, but protection from 1 dose appears to be reduced. There is no evidence that any mutations of the coronavirus cause much more serious illness for the vast majority of people. As with the original version, the risk remains highest for people who are elderly or have significant underlying health conditions, but a virus being more infectious and equally dangerous will in itself lead to more deaths in an unvaccinated population. Vietnam has seen a spike in COVID-19 cases in recent weeks. The country has registered more than 6,700 coronavirus cases since the start of the pandemic. Of those, more than half have been recorded since late April this year. It has also recorded 47 COVID-related deaths, according to Johns Hopkins University data. So Vietnam is certainly they've certainly been on the more effective side of containing this outbreak. As they showed, 67 cases and 47 deaths. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good, rate. Um, I like. I actually have to say, like, I remember watching this like TLC special on like this villager in this remote area in Vietnam, and he had like this huge tumor. Like, he was incapacitated. He couldn't move anywhere, and they did all this work on him. And I'm just sitting here thinking like, oh man, I wonder how they paid for that. I wonder how. And I'm sitting here like, oh wait, this is Vietnam. They probably have a like they yeah. Again, I don't exactly know the healthcare system there, but just knowing that they were able to contain this outbreak, I could say it's effective. Doesn't they have, the proof is in the pudding, right? So yeah, but they're detecting this, and as they said, in unvaccinated populations, this outbreak, this variant, could be devastating. So let's just hope it doesn't go into India. They're already suffering enough. And let's hope that variant doesn't come here, because you have a lot of people, as they said, with vaccination rates in the U.S. that have only done the one shot, and they're like, I don't need to take the second one. And the one shot isn't enough, and who knows what could happen if this strain comes here, because people travel to Vietnam. So I mean, yeah, man. So yeah, that's what's happening there. That's just pandemics, plagues. What you're gonna do there. So I wanted to talk more about some natural disasters that have been occurring, and there was an eruption in the Congo. So we've been covering some eruptions that have been occurring around the world, and in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a volcano erupted, and the lava flow hit some villages. Some people were forced to evacuate. Some were killed. At least 15 they're reporting, although they could find more as they're continuing rescue efforts. But yeah. So there, it's Mother Nature. She rears her head, and we all witnessed just the devastation. Yeah. So reading from ABC. At least 15 people were killed after a volcano in the eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo erupted on Saturday night for the first time in almost 2 decades, officials said. Mount Nyiragongo, located in the mountains of Virunga National Park, spewed red fumes into the night sky and sent a scorching river of lava downhill toward Goma, a lakeside city of 2 million people less than 10 miles away. So they're sitting right next to an active volcano. 2 million people. I mean, again, I can't blame them. Most people just can't leave. But yeah, man. The good thing with volcanoes, with enough like seismic, examination, you can tell if something's about to happen. Yeah, the Congolese government ordered residents of Goma to evacuate as fiery lava engulfed hundreds of homes and other buildings along the city's outskirts. Panicked residents began fleeing, many on foot, hours before the official evacuation notice. The lava crossed a major highway connecting Goma with the city of Beni, severing a key supply route, but ultimately stopped short of Goma city limits. 9 people were killed in car accidents while trying to evacuate, while another 2 people were burned to death. 4 inmates in Munzenze prison in Goma also died while trying to escape during the volcanic eruption. According to the Congolese government spokesperson Patrick Muyaya, the death toll could rise in the coming days as officials inspect the trail of destruction. Damage was reported in at least 17 villages surrounding the volcano, including suburbs of Goma. In addition to many homes, the lava destroyed several health centers, a primary school, a water pipeline, and Goma's main electricity supply line, Buyaya said. At least 25,000 people were internally displaced on Sunday, and more than 150 children were separated from their families. Over 170 children are also feared to be missing, according to the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. Meanwhile, some 8,000 people crossed the country's border into Rwanda to seek refuge following the eruption, according to the Rwandan ministry in charge of emergency management. which said most people were returning home Saturday morning after the lava flow had stopped. Mouyaya confirmed later Sunday that those who fled are gradually starting to return to their homes, or at least what is left of them. While it was unclear exactly how many households were impacted by the eruption, UNICEF said it is concerned about people returning to find destroyed or damaged homes in a lack of electricity or water. Local authorities reported several seismic tremors in Goma on Sunday afternoon, according to Mouyaya, who urged residents to remain calm and vigilant. Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi decided to cut short his trip to Europe and return home on Sunday so he could oversee the coordination of aid to the affected areas, his office announced via Twitter. Mount Nyiragongo, one of the most active and dangerous volcanoes in the world, last erupted in 2002, killing hundreds of people and leaving more than 100,000 homeless. Yeah, so a pretty serious lava flow. There's some crazy images of people just running away as this wall of molten rock is, slowly engulfing their town. So yeah, that's pretty serious, pretty scary, and it's an unstoppable force. You can't really stop it, and yeah, some of these images of the lava flow are pretty wild. Yeah, pretty gnarly, and it's just like all burnt and steaming in the middle of a village. But that's gonna cool down, and then yeah, who knows what's gonna be left of that. So that's in the Congo. And as I was talking earlier about the possibility of hurricanes that we're experiencing here in the Gulf Coast, in India, they are at risk, or they've already been hit by a cyclone, and it's been so severe that they just had to evacuate over 1 million people. It's and they were already dealing with their COVID situation, so and they were already hit with a cyclone earlier. So this is just pretty serious storms. So yes, this is from BBC, and they have this cyclone called Cyclone Yas. just making landfall and causing serious damage. So a powerful cyclone has torn into eastern India, which reports suggest it has killed several people. Cyclone Yas, which intensified into a very severe cyclonic storm, hit the states of West Bengal and Orissa, also known as Odisha, on Wednesday, as well as lashing southern Bangladesh. This is the second cyclone to hit the country in a week after Cyclone Tauktae killed more than 150 people. It comes as India is already struggling to deal with this COVID-19 outbreak. Yas lashed coastal areas with ferocious wind and rain as it made landfall in India, damaging homes and bringing waves that swamped towns. More than 1 million people were evacuated in the country as the storm approached. In its latest update, the India Meteorological Department tweeted that the cyclone had sustained winds of 70 to 80 kilometers and wind gusts of up to 90 kilometers. It said that the storm is likely to move forward northwestwards and weaken gradually in the next 3 hours. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee said some 20,000 homes were damaged in the state, with the town of Digha swamped by 4-meter high waves, 13 feet. One person was killed there after being dragged out to sea, while another died after their home collapsed, she reportedly said. In Orissa, there are reports that 2 people were killed by uprooted trees. A relief official said they were investigating the incidents. Nearly 1,200 rescue shelters have been sanitized in line with COVID-19 safety norms, and health teams have been deployed there. But there are worries that it will be difficult to maintain social distancing protocols. More than 1 million people are evacuated to shelters, according to news agency ANI. So yeah, some pretty serious images, and people flooded out and dealing with the damage. But yeah, they're already dealing with the COVID stuff, and then they got this storm, and their monsoon seasons are pretty gnarly as well. So yeah, I mean, lots of flooding that people are dealing with. But yeah, it's either that they're dealing with floodings or hurricanes, just the worst, tidal surges, or just bone dry conditions, no water, Martian like deserts, and just fire everywhere, like the pits of hell. Like it's just, yeah, man. So extreme weather in India. So that's what we've been dealing with. And before I wrap up, just wanted to talk real quick about reports of a mice plague in Australia, which again is also linked to climate change. And they've just been speaking how, just Australia in general, there's all these invasive species, and so the ecology there is always under risk and under threat. But they're just pointing towards how a lot of different weather conditions have been adding up, including also with their harvests. And then they got these mice basically eating up their harvest, and it's affecting their businesses, and it's all just feeding it to each other. So I'm reading from the New York Times, and I just wanted to get a quote real quick. So I'm reading from a farmer called Mr. Fraser, and he's saying, quote, we've had 3 years where we didn't even get our crop in the ground because of the drought, and we have one half reasonable year, which the mice are now destroying. If you don't get it in again, I'd say we'd be out of luck here. The bank won't carry us any further, end quote. So yeah, they're just really on the ropes here, and they're really just trying to deal with this, and they're just talking about how these infestations, they just devastate these communities, because it's everywhere. I can't even imagine it. Like, you see some of these images at night where they're out and about, and it's just a swarm, and you just hear the squeaking and the scratching and scrambling. It's just crazy. So, and people are just killing them by the bucket loads, and cremating them, poisoning them. I mean, it's crazy. They have a whole bunch of kids just let's hunt some rats, but it's just millions of them. And so they're hoping that as this winter starts to hit, that the populations will decline. But they're usually saying when they're running out of food, they when the mice run out of food, they turn on the weak and the sick, and they start eating their babies. So they're anticipating that if they survive with enough numbers in the winter, their populations could explode further. So yeah, man, it's these are little rats, they're rodents, and they reproduce quickly. But that's just a real apocalyptic plague there. So they had the fires there, and now they're also dealing with the ecological disasters and the plagues of invasive species. But again, it's all with the climate, and it's all nature getting back at us. So this is a pretty lengthy episode, and I'm pretty confident this is a good place to wrap up. But I'm glad that y'all are sticking around, and if you like what I say, or you want to support me further and help me along, get early access, you can definitely check my Patreon out. I keep talking about doing additional content. I'm really going to try to get something out for y'all. Whatever I can do, just to have fun, really. But yeah, anyway, I appreciate y'all sticking around. Hope y'all are staying safe, and I fully anticipate that the next time that I record, we're going to have some serious natural disasters. So we'll just have to see what happens then. But stay prepped, and watch your neck, protect your neck. So we'll see you around.